of the knowledge you will gain. And at the end of your thesis, you will have achieved something at the end. And it's an amazing experience when what you've been working on for 6 months actually works. But during that period, it's a lot of hard work. And I would even go to the extent of saying it's absolutely brutal, because the professor will really push you. But research is such that if you're curious about it, and if you don't give up and you really want answers to something, basically on your research topic, then I would say a thesis is for you. But you're going to have that intrinsic value to actually push yourself and stay determined, even when there are extended periods where you will feel that there is no progress in your thesis. So if you're that kind of person who's really passionate about what they're doing, and you're really committed to finding answers, I would suggest that you do a thesis. Uh, yeah. So the next question that comes, please excuse the informal pictures. I only put that over there so that you don't fall asleep. Uh, the next big question, once you decide that you have to do a thesis, is deciding on a specialization. So a lot of you over here, I'm assuming, would be part of the Electronics and Robotics Club or the Aerodynamics Club, or you would have some experience in working on some projects before. So you would have a certain idea about the general area in which you do want to pursue a thesis. So you'll have to strike a balance between the prior experience that you have and the future prospects that are there in the field. So this is that period of time when you can actually explore something new, but having a bit of prior experience in the field that you do want to explore is always helpful. Now this can include the past projects that you worked on, reading published work in that field. So this is really important to actually understand that the field that you finally intend on going into is actually what you imagined it to be. It's not something completely different. And the only way that you can do that is actually look at the work that people have published in that field. And of course, the most important factor, I would say, the ultimate decision lies in what you're drawn to naturally and are passionate about. So, for example, the students of the Aerodynamics Club, I saw a few of them are really passionate about, control theory in drones and quadcopters. So, even if it's not something that you're very, comfortable with, but you're willing to learn and you're passionate about it, I would say go for it. So the you can broadly categorize the field of robotics into biomedical robotics, soft robotics, aerial, terrestrial, and underwater robotics. Choose a field, start exploring it, and as in by and by when you read all of the stuff, you will come to know what each of them entails, the details, and you'll gradually get interested in it. So for those of you who are in your first and second year, uh, please start exploring it right now. Those of you in your third year, I'm pretty sure all of you will have specialized in at least one of these. So you just need to look at the more specifics of the field that you want to get into. So, and then again, once you have decided on these, then there are a number of fields that you can diversify into. For example, navigation, perception, and control theory. So again, these are certain details that you'll have to work out for yourself, and your the professors that you apply to, and all your further steps from now will only be once you've decided what specialization you're supposed to do. So yeah, this is, I would say, the second step. Now coming to the main point, I'm sure others will speak about this in detail as well, but here are a few things that I wish somebody had told me before I actually started applying for a thesis. uh, the first thing that you should do is that make a spreadsheet containing a list of all of the professors that you want to contact. So you can sort by university, sort by the supposing you read somebody's work that you really like, so you can start putting their names in, and also create a list. Like they should be ordered in the sense from your highest preference to your lowest preference, and just create that list, and also so that you can keep track of who you've mailed, when you've mailed, how many times you've mailed. So the an organized way to do it is that you create a spreadsheet of all the professors and the universities and the name of the lab that they belong to. So yeah, first step is that you find this out. I would suggest that you start doing this as soon as possible, probably in the month of September, I would say, or even before that, because it takes a long time to actually come to know all the professors in your working in your area. Start mailing well in advance, preferably in November, even before this. I cannot stress how important this point is. Uh, I made the mistake of applying really late, and I lost out on a lot of great opportunities because the labs get full. There are very few, especially the really good ones, they definitely get full very early. But even the ones that are not really sought after, because so many people apply, so they get full really fast, and you'll miss out on a lot of great opportunities if you apply late. So please start mailing very, very well in advance. Now, coming to what is supposed to be in the mail that you send, please keep your mail as concise as possible. Okay, professors don't have time to read huge stories. They don't want to see like your entire life stories and everything. They don't have time. So please keep it as concise as possible. I'm not saying miss out on relevant points. I'm saying just keep it. Keep whatever project you're applying to or whatever field you're applying to, only the very, very relevant details that and your best points like that actually help in convincing him that you were the perfect person for this. So yeah, that's number one. Number two, they can easily recognize if you've used templates. So please don't do that. Make one template, just change the prof's name and send it to multiple people. They'll catch on to that. It shows your lack of will to actually research the professor, and your the lack of your commitment to it. So I would say don't under any circumstance do that. The third point is that yeah, they won't even look at your mail if you haven't attached your resume, your some form of prior work. The best is that if you worked on some open source, if you worked on some, either you have open source contributions or your projects, make proper repositories for it, format it, make proper readmes, and put your GitHub link there. My prof told me this once I was working under him. He said that I don't even look at a mail if it does not have a GitHub link in it. This my senior told me and my prof told me. So a big factor is some form of prior work. If he can judge you on, that's a very important thing. And if you can make a website, yeah, that's a great way of showcasing your work. Then yeah, please research the prof that you're sending a mail to. The you can write, if you've read his paper, some published work of his, you can mention that okay, I read your paper and so, and I like this and this is what I think I could have I could have changed, or where this lacks, this is what I loved about your work. And something to show that you actually understand his work and his or her work. And yeah, something that shows that you can actually improve upon it. So that is another thing. Yeah, don't send it so like when you applied in November, during December their vacation start, and if you send it then they're obviously not going to see it. And even on holidays, your mail will just be lost if you send it, because they'll receive multiple mails and it'll just be lost if you send it during holidays. So the best is that you schedule mails and send it during their local time zone, daylight hours. So when he opens it, the best is that you send it around 8 a.m. in the morning. So when he reaches office and he opens it and he checks his mail, yours is like one of the first mails there, so you can actually check it. So and yeah, this is going to happen. You will not receive replies. I mean, I hope you do, but invariably what happens is that you will send multiple mails and you won't receive replies. Please don't get disheartened. It happens a lot. The standard operating procedure is you send a reminder after a week. You send another reminder if the professor is really, if you really want to work under the professor, and just hope for a reply. But I will be honest over here. I myself had to send, I would have sent at least 5-6 mails every day, and there were days on end where I did not receive any reply. And a lot of my friends also had to face the same thing. So it's extremely humbling and a very emotionally draining process. I mean, irrespective of your achievements, you will feel, okay, I'll definitely get a reply, but that does not happen. So it is important that you don't give up even after not receiving a reply. And I would suggest that please contact a senior so that if there's any mistake that you're making, he can help you with it, help you correct it, or try if there's a major error, then yeah, we can help you out with that. So I just briefly quickly go over my thesis. Yeah, before that, the things that I wish I knew before starting my thesis, when I actually got a thesis at the UNR, I was very comfortable with Python. I used it, almost everywhere, but and very, very little knowledge of C++. But I realized that when you actually work on a project, then in the real world, when you're contributing to open source projects, and Python is very rarely used, C++ is very ubiquitously used. It's obviously faster, and apart from writing minimum scripts, I never used Python during my thesis. So I mean, this is of course if you're going to be in the programming side of things, but yeah, I would suggest that if you have to learn something, C++ is essential. Knowledge of GitHub again. So I can tell you an anecdote where I would suggest that you please go through a proper course on GitHub, because I made a lot of mistakes. Well, when I used GitHub, I actually pushed to the wrong repository, and that was not because I'm not comfortable with cloning, push, and pulling. It was because my origin was set incorrectly. So I did make mistakes like that, and it is fine to make mistakes, but I would suggest that don't do that, because it may not like if you want an LOR or something, then it may hamper your chances to get a good one. So, but yeah, besides the point, knowledge of GitHub is essential, and not just, again, like I said, git clone, git pull, git push. I mean proper, like merging upstream, squashing commits, reverting commits, very important. So yeah, please, proper knowledge of GitHub is really important. And yeah, if you can, then please try to publish your work in a good conference or journal. It'll help you a lot. So it doesn't matter if 6 months is too short and you it doesn't get accepted and you still want to continue working on it. That's what happened with me. So just keep trying. Like, you can request your professor to work even after your 6 month period is over. So yeah, definitely try for that. So yeah, my thesis topic was resource-aware online parameter adaptation on computationally constrained visual inertial navigation systems. Now I understand if you don't get this, it's basically a fancy way of saying that I worked on localization algorithms, basically visual inertial odometry, on very, very low, computationally low powered PCs. So those of you who worked with robotics, you know that a Raspberry Pi 4 is a really, really sub power PC in terms of computing power. So I essentially try to work on bringing down visual inertial odometry algorithms to work on that and give proper results, even when you have computationally heavy processes running simultaneously on the same PC. So that was my thesis topic. Apart from that, I also worked on Perception Open 3D, which is now there are two packages which are now part of ROS Perception, and I submitted a lightning talk which got accepted to ROS World. So yeah, that was something that we were doing on the side. So you can ask your prof to do things like this, like open source contributions as part of the lab. That also helps. It shows initiative. So I would recommend you do that too. So yeah, these are the two things that I did during my thesis. I'm not going to bore you with the jargon, but again, the way I did this, the way I actually worked on my parameter adaptation method, uh, was that when you work on aerial robots, you don't have access to all the computational power that you wish you had. And there are certain mission critical processes, for example, running a planning algorithm, which stresses the PC a lot at certain point of times. And what used to happen then is your visual inertial odometry algorithm, which helps in localizing your robot in three-dimensional space. I believe Rishikesh will talk after this. He'll explain localization in more detail, but it's basically coming to know your orientation and position in 3D space. So that's what visual inertial odometry algorithms do, state estimation. So yeah, that's an essential process, and that would essentially fail when the PC is stressed, because acquiring visual images and stuff is slightly expensive. So my work was to alter the algorithm's front end, which involves getting the image data and the IMU data, and the optimization backend of visual inertial odometry algorithms. So you can broadly classify them into two parts: getting data from the camera and IMU, and running optimization in them. So I had to optimize both of these to get them to run on very, very computationally inexpensive PCs. So the method utilized motion dynamics. So essentially, I also took into account how fast the drone was moving to alter how much the frame rate I need to process the measurements coming in and yeah, so these three things I use to actually run my resource-aware parameter adaptation method. The two algorithms I worked with are very famous visual inertial odometry algorithms. One of them is the stereo multi-state constraint Kalman filter, Those of you who worked with aerial robots, you know that these are de facto standards. VINS-Mono, again, a monocular visual inertial odometry algorithm responsible for localization of robots. Again, so there are complicated equations associated with each of these blocks. I am not going to show them here. But yeah, like I said, it takes in camera and IMU data, hence the visual inertial part of it. So these were the front end blocks that I targeted for reducing computational intensity. And one of the things was that you can drop frame rates when your uh, drone is moving, or when your quadcopter or aerial vehicle is moving really slowly, so that you don't need to process very high frame rates. And the other thing I did was altering the number of features, both according to illumination and according to how rich your surrounding is in terms of number of features available. Uh, Also according to the how stressed your PC is. So if there's a very stressful algorithm running in the background, it's not going to choose to detect features in your image. And feature detection is a very important part of actually, it basically, a visual inertial algorithm will actually see how your features are moving in your image and try to backtrack and calculate its own movement. So if I lower the number of features, it doesn't need to detect as many features. Accuracy will reduce, but again, it will take less computational intensity. So yeah, these are the blocks that I targeted, both of them. In the optimization backend, again, not going to go into the details, but basically altering the number of iterations that it has to run to optimize something is something I targeted. Both the number of optimizations and the type of solver, the linear solver that you use. So if any of you are actually interested in the details, please contact me later. Those of you want, I'll just continue. So these are the results that I had actually got. So these are probably what I'll be able to explain better. So when the PC was stressed, so the blue line is actually the core usage of the PC. So you can see when that actually peaked to 100%, the process usage actually dropped because immediately the number of features I started detecting was reduced. The slightly reddish areas are the periods where my CPU was stressed. So you can see that my usage spiked to 100%, and immediately it would drop the features. And when there was no spike detected, the number of features would come back up again. Did the same. This was tested on the UROC dataset. The UROC dataset is like a standard in aerial robotic for when you test a VIO algorithm, visual inertial odometry algorithm. That's what you use. So V102 and V202 are the name of the bag files over there. Similarly, for the number of iterations, so this is the optimization backend I'm talking about. Whenever the PC was stressed, these fell. When it wasn't stressed, they increased. Again, just a table to show my results. So basically, I was able to bring down the CPU usage by 20%. These are the data sets, V102, they're all different rooms. This is the change in accuracy. So the translational accuracy and the rotation accuracy. And this is the change in CPU usage. So 20, 13, 30, and 14% in different rooms. And with VINS-Mono, I was able to bring it down by 41, 56, 55, and 16%, depending on the data set. So yeah, this was my thesis. And here is just a visual representation. So you can see even in a really dark textile, even in a very dark, that's not feature rich, I was able to actually, this is a serpentine dataset. This is exactly what the localization, the odometry is supposed to look like. This was able to work along with the CPU being stressed, artificially stressed. So yeah, this is an example of it being pushed to its peak and still working. So yeah, that's all from my side. If you have any questions, I'll stick around till the end. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Pranay. Our next speaker is Tejas Rane.
Hello, I guess I'm audible.
Yes.
Yeah. So first of all, I would like to say that a very good talk by Pranay, and I'm going to. So I will just be frank with you. Most of the points that he mentioned are going to repeat a lot through all this. So all of us, I think, will be focusing more on so the like our own experiences. So yeah, I'll just share my screen quickly. So yeah, so first of all, a small about me. So I am Tejas Rane. I am a 2017 batch mechanical engineer, and I have mainly worked in ERC, AeroD, and sandbox committees. But I also worked with these two professors, Professor Praveen Singru and Shankar Reddy, on modular robotics. So in all this work, my entire focus of work was mechanical designing, manufacturing, and hardware. But later on, I also got into ROS, control systems, reinforcement learning, and all. So why I am mentioning this is that what I observed is many people, based on their own branches, are actually they are attracted towards work which is more related to their own branch. So very naturally, I was also more attracted towards mechanical designing and manufacturing. But one very important point in robotics is when you go on an stage outside college, so actually working in research labs, it's very important for you to know basics of all sectors of robotics. So I am not saying that you need to know complicated algorithms or such if you're not interested in that, but you are expected to know basics of ROS and programming. So I will come back to these points, but yeah. So my main research interests are based on biomimetic systems. So biomimetic systems is a huge branch, and there are many things that come under biomimetic systems. So in biomimetic systems, I mainly work on legged robotics and locomotion and modular robotics. So my current work is totally focused on controller development, reinforcement learning based controls, and this very important topic, which is called as shared control. So which means that the control is shared with the user as well as the automation algorithm. So my thesis was based at RBCCPS at IISc Bangalore, so which is Robert Bosch Center for Cyber Physical Systems. So I worked on the stock series of quadrupeds at RBCCPS. So basically, there is till now the lab has developed 2 robots, stock 1, stock 2, and we are in the process of developing stock 3. But my work was mainly on stock light. So being a Bitsian, obviously it was supposed to be named stock light. And so it is basically an intermediate step between stock 2 and stock 3. So the idea to develop this was because stock 2 was a different actuation system, stock 3 was a totally different actuation system. So in my first half, I worked only on the designing sector. Being a mechanical engineer, I had experience in designing, I had experience in manufacturing, working on my projects in these clubs. So I worked only on the designing part. So while designing stock light, I worked on basically designing the entire robot from the feet to the electronics. So every single bolt on the robot was designed by me. Then I got into this very interesting thing called reinforcement learning. So we use reinforcement learning methods to train the robot to walk. And the terrains we used were flat ground, slope terrains, rough terrains, and all of them with shared control. So all these things, sometimes we work on these things in our college, we work on these things with our professors. But main thing in terms of experience is that there is a huge difference between working on campus and working in research specific labs. So most of it, I guess, already Pranay has mentioned. But to give specific details, I would say that some things when we work on campus in our hobby projects in clubs or with professors in SOPs or DOPs, some things are not taken quite seriously. Like most of the time we will go with a basic idea of that this thing almost looks right, so it should be right. But when you work with research specific labs, you have to provide proof for every single thing. Why was this decision taken? Why did you go ahead with this? So this is one practice which everyone should get started with, that you need to find reasons for every single step that you take. It can be as simple as changing one sign in your code. So a positive variable, you made it negative, but why? What was your thought process behind it? Why did you come to that conclusion that that specific sign needs to be changed? This is one thing that should be developed if you want to go ahead towards research. So very important tips for people who are interested in robotics in general. So as Pranay mentioned, one programming language is extremely must. So you should know either Python or C++. So in my thesis, I worked mainly with Python. All my reinforcement learning codes were in Python. And then with that, ROS is also a necessary knowledge base right now. Without knowing ROS or any one of the programming languages, right now it's very difficult for people to get into robotics. This has become a must. Next, these are a few courses which we actually do in our campus life, but we don't take them seriously. But this is what I had to come back again and again. So I am not exaggerating when I would say that I would literally come back to linear algebra every single month to revise my basics, because I was using it so frequently during my entire period of thesis. Next, you should get familiar with the latest research in your field. So if you're interested in legged robotics, for example, you should be up to date with what is happening all around the world and how things are getting updated or how things are getting done in international labs. Then you should also start working with open source projects and trying to implement it on your own. So while doing this, you should keep a good maintained repository on your GitHub, which will help you a lot later when you try to send mails to your professors. So basically, you need to build up your CV as much as possible. So when I say build up your CV, I mean that in terms of skills, in terms of projects, in terms of experience in your specific field. So all of this is important because in my case, my professor used to focus more on how you put forth your work. So for example, if you mention specific things in your CV, are you able to justify it properly? Are you able to, so was that work done in detail so that you are able to explain it properly? Where the important points? And yes, experience in the field plays a very important role. So you need to show work that has been done in your specific field. So coming next to some important tips related to thesis. So again, these points are going to repeat a lot, but yeah, the common process that we all follow is making a list or an Excel document of all the labs that you're interested to work in. And we make the list such that it is divided into maybe our preferences or labs which have already been contacted, labs which you need to have a follow-up mail and all that. So this Excel sheet has to be extremely detailed so that you just look at one spreadsheet and you know your situation, how many labs have been contacted, how many gave a positive reply, negative reply, where do I need to mail again, etc. Then I would suggest that you be in contact with seniors especially from the fields which are common to your interests, because normally when people go into thesis or into research, they have a basic idea of openings in some places, or what things or what resources need to be followed while you apply for research positions in those sectors, etc. So having a contact with seniors is very important. Then I mentioned this already, but yeah, your CV should be extremely justifiable. It's not, so even if your CV is very short, 1 or 2 pages, it's fine. But whatever you write in your CV should be justifiable. And this is again based on my own experience, because during my interview, I was literally grilled based on my CV. So the prof had my CV open and he questioned me on each and every point. Then when you draft your mail for your professor, it should be such that the reader can go through all important points quickly. So tricks to do this could be using bold, like highlighting the points, the important points in your mail, or just putting a short list. So putting pointers of the things that you want to highlight in your mail. Then again, your mail should be timed properly. So as it is already mentioned, during holidays, we don't send mails. Normally, if you are in contact with seniors who have worked in that lab, then they will be able to tell you the office hours of that specific professor. And you can target those specific time slots to send your mails, so that you have, so the professor he's able to check your mail easily. Then during this specific COVID time, I have observed that we always have to be ready with backups. So I personally had an offer from CMU in January, but due to the lockdown from March, all of that had to be cancelled. So I had to switch my thesis in March from CMU to IISc. So having this backup was a very good option there. So this is specifically for these times because we don't know how things go bad in the next month. So always try to have backups. So yeah, many people argue on this point that getting one approval is very tough. How do we get backups? So by backups, I mean look for labs around your area. So basically, if you're living in Mumbai, look for labs in IIT Bombay. In Bangalore, obviously there is IISc. So look for labs in India where if you want to travel, you can travel even if there are some restrictions. So yeah, these were some tips which were very specific to my experience. Again, if you want to know more about my research or if you want to contact me further for more details, you can obviously contact me. So my mobile number and mail has been given. And yeah, that's it from my side. If you have any specific details, I will be here to help you out. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Tejas. Now our next speaker is Harshal Deshpande.
Hello guys, I hope everyone's all right in these tough times. So I haven't made a presentation. I have made some notes on Notion. I'll just share the link in the chat. Okay, so my thesis, so I'll just introduce myself before starting my talk. So I'm Harshal Deshpande. My thesis was at the Autonomous Robots Lab at University of Nevada, Reno, and like the professor has now like moved to NTNU Norway, and the PI of the lab was Kostas Alexis. He's the head lead researcher in the lab basically. So I'll directly get to the point. So why should you guys do thesis? And I think Pranay covered most of the points. But like these were some of the I think he missed these points. So thesis basically helps you decide if you want to go for a PhD or a master's or even industry after your bachelor's degree. So like in the 4 years of your college, like you'll not definitely understand if you want to go into research or industry, and maybe like a thesis is the perfect place to understand if you like doing research or you like building products and you want to go into industry. So that was one of the missed point. Then for applying for thesis, you have to decide if you want to go in the first sem or the second sem. So the reason why you should go in the first sem is majorly because if you are if you know definitely that you want to go for higher studies, then having LOR from the thesis professor will definitely benefit you in your application process. So maybe going in the first sem would be a better choice. But say for example you want to take break for 1 or 2 years before you go for higher studies, then you can set for placements in the first semesters and then go for thesis or in the second sem, or there is another way you can approach this, instead of doing job just after graduating, you can even apply for RShips and basically RShips. So doing thesis in second sem might help you in that. So basically before applying for thesis, you have to decide your field of research. So maybe like for first sem thesis, October to November is like the perfect time to like decide your field of research. So in my case, I was like not sure if I wanted to do thesis in embedded systems or like robotics, and like I finally decided that I wanted to do thesis in robotics in around like mid-October. And then right after that, I started looking for professors. So like you should like start looking for professors in like November or December if you're like applying for first time thesis, and in June and July if you're like applying for thesis in second sem. And while looking for professors, like these are maybe two things that you should do. First thing is like very important, like you should read the research papers, and like you should try to understand their work. So like even in your thesis, you'll basically like add on to their research work. You'll not be doing something very different than what is being done in the lab. So like reading research papers and understanding what they're doing at the time of your application is definitely beneficial. And also like most robotics research labs publish their code on GitHub or Bitbucket. So like you should definitely check out their like open source repositories. That could be directly related to the paper, or some might be some like supporting packages that the lab is using. And maybe if you have the like technical skills, you can, and like if you want to like improve that package, then you can maybe send a pull request to that repository, and that will also help help your application. Then after like you have shortlisted the professors, you should like start drafting the emails. And for first sem thesis, maybe you should like start drafting the drafting the emails in like late December to January. And for second sem thesis, maybe July onward, like July is the best time. And like you should start sending emails right from January for like first sem thesis, and like July for second sem thesis. So in most cases, so in like academia in like US or in Europe works differently than in India. So like if the lab is very big, then the professor might have a few postdoctoral students who like actually manage the lab, and the professor might not actually be responsible for like hiring the interns or the RAs. So in case if the lab is very big, then maybe sending the email directly to the postdoc will be the right thing to do. But if the lab is small, you can directly send the email to the professor. And in most cases, you will also not get replies. So following up, as Pranay mentioned, is very important. And even in your follow-up emails, you should not just mention that I'm following up on my thesis application. Could you please let me know? Instead of like doing that, like after every week, you should maybe read upon their work, and like if you understand something new, then like you should definitely mention that in your follow-up email. And if the professor like reads that follow-up email, then like he'll definitely like reply you. So this was for applying the application process, and my friend has actually written a very good blog. You can check that out. And also for like general application related stuff, you should like definitely check out BITS R&D webpage. Yeah, so like that was basically about the application process. Then I'll briefly talk about my work. So my work was titled Hypergame Based Adaptive Behavior Path Planning for like combined exploration and visual search. So my lab, the Autonomous Robots Lab, is like participating in a challenge called as DARPA Subterranean Challenge, along with a few labs like ETH Zurich ASL, then Oxford's Robot Systems Lab, and a few more. So the main aim of DARPA Subterranean Challenge is to achieve autonomy in very rash environments like cave or mines. So my work was mainly on the motion planning side of the project, that is the DARPA Subterranean Challenge. So I'll just quickly go over my video. So the paper video and the paper presentations are like available on YouTube. So you can check that out if you are interested. But I'll just briefly go through this work. So we like proposed a hypergame based strategy. So in normal game theory, both the players in the game know what each other's strategy might be. But in hypergame theory, one player does not know about the opponent's strategy. So it's kind of probabilistic in nature. That's why we went with this method basically. So why hypergame? So in our hypergame, the main player was this robot, which is an aerial quadrotor, and the opponent in our case was the environment. So the robot basically plays hypergame with the environment, and we designed the hypergame strategies such that it like adaptively selects between the exploration behavior and the visual search behavior. So in the DARPA Subterranean Challenge, like you have to find certain artifacts in the environment, and like one of the artifact can be seen in this video. So like this bag is like one of the artifacts that is supposed to be found in the environment during the challenge. So for that, you have to like your robotic agent has to explore as much area as it can, and at the same time the onboard sensors have to optimally cover the area so that it can detect the artifacts in the environment. So for that, if you just have one kind of planner, so for say for example you design a simple exploration based planner, then your robot will simply explore the environment and it will not try to see the entire environment. So we designed a visual search. We designed a coverage planner which tried to optimize for the visual coverage of the environment, and we also had this exploration planner which was developed by one of the PhD students in the lab. So in our work, we use this GB planner for the exploration strategy, and we also like presented a new coverage planner for the visual coverage of the environment. So as you can see, like the adaptive selection between the exploration behavior and the visual coverage, like the coverage planner, has resulted in more coverage of the area, more visual coverage of the area. So this black part in the image is basically the total explored part of the environment. But the robot has not actually seen that area visually. But this red part is explored volumetrically as well as visually. So that was kind of the gist of my work. The detailed information can be found in this paper presentation, and like it's available on YouTube. So from my thesis, the main deliverable is kind of this conference paper, which was accepted at the IEEE ICRA conference. And maybe in a few months after the final stage of the DARPA Subterranean Challenge, they will also like open source this work. So like my major learnings during my thesis were like mainly how I mainly understood how academia works outside India. Like I had worked with one professor in BITS, but I would say that working with him and working with Costas is like really different. So like I understood how academia works outside India, and I also like learned how robotics research is generally conducted in a research lab. Then I would like to give some advice to the firsties and the secondies who are like attending this talk and like who will see this talk later. So I would recommend that you should definitely go through this repository. It's created by one of the PhD students at UC Berkeley, and like she has added few links to some blogs which will help you decide if you want to like go into research or like industry, or if like it also has links to some blogs which are which will help you if you want to do research right into your undergrad. And also like you should look for good mentors and advisors in your second year if you want to conduct like research in general. That the mentors could be your seniors or some professors. So like it's really important that you should look for good mentors and not just any mentor. So if you're looking for SOP or LOP or basically project course, then definitely like work with a good professor who will like encourage you and support you, and like who is actually doing some good research in the college. And like there are a few professors, so make sure you contact those professors. And lastly, I would like to say that like there is no such thing as starting late in robotics. So like some of you like might have not worked in robotics as of now. Like you must have only seen some videos on YouTube or Twitter or Reddit, and like you think robotics is really cool, but you think it's late. But I'd like to say that it's never late to start in robotics. And a good resource for you to start in robotics is like you can definitely go through this roadmap on like ERC's handbook page. So like if you're interested in learning more about robotics, then like definitely go through this. And if you have any doubts regarding the thesis process or about my work, then you can definitely reach out to me on my email, which is mentioned over here. So yeah, that's it from my side. Yeah.
Thanks, Harshal. Now our next three speakers who are Mohit Gupta, Rishikesh Vanarse and Akash Chaudhary, they have done their thesis in underwater robotics. So we will start with Mohit Gupta.
Hello. I hope I'm audible.
Yes.
Okay, I'll present my screen. All right, is this visible?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, the previous speakers perfectly summed up the things or the points you need, like while applying for thesis, why you should, in the first place, apply for thesis, whether you should go for master's, PhD. Only one additional thing is like you also have many Facebook and other LinkedIn pages where you can contact your seniors and other groups. So yeah, other than that, like I think they perfectly summed up. So I thought like since most of the questions are answered, I'll discuss more about what my personal experience was. So these are the broad questions I thought would be best to answer and most of the people might have. So starting with my background before the thesis, I was a member of the Electronics and Robotics Club ERC since my first year, and my only goal was to learn whatever I could and try to apply it somewhere. So during the 4 years, I had explored various fields in robotics, which are like controls, visions, hardware designing, planning, electronics, somewhat mechanical design. So these are the broad subdomains of the robotics field. Then I got this experience while working on some of the projects which were very interesting ones. One of them was ThoughtBot, which was the delivery bot. I was a part of the navigation electronics team. Then the LED Globe, where I learned more about hardware designing and programming, those kind of stuff. Then there was my personal project called Quadruped. There I learned a lot about the control theory, dynamics, and those aspects. So like this, I tried to explore various fields, and I finally thought was what I was more interested was in controls and planning aspects of the robotics. And during this time, I also connected with amazing seniors and juniors. I got to learn a lot about robotics from them. And next, I was a member of the Sandbox Lab. I got exposure to a kind of different field, which was project and lab management, which also sometimes comes in handy when you're working at some research lab. So like you would like to know how things move around over there. And because of this, I was able to connect with professors also on campus as well as off campus. So we had uh, professors or the what is the faculty committee for Sandbox. So every year we also used to hold showcases where we could connect with every professor, know about their experiences. We could showcase our projects to them. I also got to connect with similar minds on the campus, which were coming to work in Sandbox. I also got experience with the different equipments like laser plasma cutters, 3D printers, how do you fix them, and yeah, so on and so forth. So the other experience I got was the summer internship at NIO, which is the National Institute of Oceanography. It's in Goa, and like the professor whom I worked under was Pramod Kumar Maurya, and I got connected with him due to Sandbox. So there was once when he visited our campus and also came to Sandbox Lab. So that time, luckily, I was also working on. Oh, by the way, like they work on this underwater robotics and stuff. So during that time, I was also exploring this underwater domain and was trying to create simulations for them using ROS and Gazebo platforms. So like when they visited our lab, we had a very great interaction. They told us about their projects. We showed them what we were working on. I was able to show them what I was working on, the software, the simulation part, the Gazebo part. So he was very fascinated and offered me like to work with him to develop simulations for them. So till then they didn't have any proper ROS or those 3D kinds of simulation set up for their own projects. So that's how I got in touch with them. So where was my thesis? I continued my thesis at the same marine instrumentation department NIO at Goa, and it was not actually at IISc Bangalore as mentioned in the mail. Although I currently work over there, but yeah, that's a different thing. And it was a complete remote thesis. Although like I planned to go over there during the second half of my thesis, that was around October, November, December. But due to many institute restrictions and all, I was unable to do so. So even though I wasn't able to go there, I had remote access to their PC, their hardware, through which I could test and like deploy my algorithms and the software stack. So next is how I got my thesis. Yeah, it was actually on a call. So what this might seem a very unconventional way of getting a thesis, but yeah, it has an interesting story. So initially, as even Rane said, we got a offer from CMU to work on the thesis. That was also because we had a connection on the recommendation of one of our seniors who we had worked with during undergrad in BITS. So after the pandemic struck, we actually got a mail from him saying that he won't be able to host us due to like remotely basically. So in case of panic, I thought the best alternative to this was continue what I had worked on in my summer, because in the summer we had only created a simulation platform. What if we extend that work and actually work on creating the complete vehicle software on ROS? So I directly like over the years from summer to my end of third year, we had built I had built a very good rapport with that professor. We used to talk about the projects even during the third year informally, and I used to help him with some of the stuff. And like he was so motivated and supportive that he even used to call me at 8 p.m. at night and discuss about some things. And like he even picked my call, and we used to discuss for half an hour to 1 hour on some topic. So yeah, he was very enthusiastic, supported, and I thought that would be something I would like to do for my thesis too. So what was my work related to? So the title of my final work was Hardware in the Loop simulator for the unmanned underwater vehicle using ROS, which is the robot operating system, and Gazebo, which is a 3D simulator with a physics engine. So my role was to create a complete software package from scratch for the vehicle to be deployed and on the vehicle using the ROS system. So initially, all of their code was developed using MATLAB and implemented using the traditional C programs. But like we thought, why not port it to ROS? So because that helps like create your basically development. It makes the development process easy because it is a very modular architecture, and there are many other important factors that make it better. So how did it help me? It exposed me to the challenges of a completely new domain, that was underwater robotics, and improved greatly my software development skills, because like I used to majorly code in Python before my thesis, and like in my thesis I completely made that software using C++ and few parts with Python. So it wasn't like just my work wasn't just porting that thing, their C code to this ROS, but also like developing new modules like the navigation, new algorithms for control guidance, and like one of the major things I worked on was mission primitives and implementing them using basically a mission manager and those protocols. So we developed software for a GCS. We developed like the complete package for GCS, the vehicle software, and the simulation. So one of the main challenges was to develop it such that we have a hardware in the loop. So what it means is basically if you run the vehicle code on your actual hardware and connect it to the PC running the simulation, so you need not take that hardware directly to Oceans for testing. You can directly connect it to that PC, and the hardware thinks that it is getting, like it is actually operating in an underwater environment. So that is the main advantage of using a hardware in the loop simulator. So the other PC running the simulation actually like simulates all the real world sensor outputs, which I had done in my summer, and in the thesis actually developed sensor interfaces and like improved on them to create a complete stack for the vehicle. So it would be like if you remove the PC and connect the real world sensors to the same port, the vehicle wouldn't know the difference. Like it would act as if it is operating in the real world. So how did it help the group? So since porting our new the C code to the ROS framework, it opened up new possibilities for the incoming interns. Like they could work very well on perception guidance algorithms, because the code was more structured. The C code gets a bit messy when you have larger projects. So like it opened up new possibilities, and it made the development process quite simpler. So yeah, when I started my thesis, I like had a completely blank slate. I did this work from the scratch, so it was very exciting. I had many iterations for the same code, how we could implement it in a better way. We had to research about how different like if you had heard of Mavros and those kind of things, so how they actually implement their code for real world applications and such things. So yeah, knowing about the hardware specific sides of the software development and like such thing was very interesting. So the key takeaways from this would be like keep building a knowledge base, keep exploring all the different possibilities. You'll eventually like know what you are majorly interested in. Have backups. Have backups is a very important thing in that even Rane said. Uh, so if I didn't have any contact with my senior or this prof at NIO, I would have been left with no other choice but to pursue my thesis in the second sem, which I didn't want to do because I was eligible for early graduation. So I in any ways had to do my thesis in 4-1, and this connection helped me a lot. So connect with seniors, prof, maybe on bits, maybe outside bits, where like just where you find the work interesting, just mail them, ask for internship, like summer internship, winter internships, or something like that, collaborations, and yeah, have backups. So yeah, that's it from my side. It was my personal experience which I shared. So thank you. Any queries you can ask me.
Yeah. Thanks, Mohit. Now our next speaker is Rishikesh Vanarse.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, I'll just share my screen. Just a minute. Just a minute. I'm still here, right?
Yes.
Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I think it should work now. Yeah, I think it's working.
Yes.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Rishikesh Munadse. So I did my thesis in underwater robotics from the Autonomous Robots Lab of University of Nevada, Reno, which is the same lab that Herschel worked in. So I saw some of the previous talks, the ones right now and the ones on the previous days, and they were pretty informative. So I think that most of the general tips on how to acquire a thesis and how to mail professors, they should have been covered by now from most of the previous talks. So my talk would be more inclined towards robotics, and the tips that I will discuss would be more based around the approach that I took. So in general, what I would be talking about is firstly general thesis tips, which would work for everyone, but they are slightly more inclined towards robotics, in which I'll talk about how to decide a specific research area. Then I'll be talking about the personalized email approach, which I followed, and yeah, I'll also be discussing some of the useful pointers which I got from my previous batches. And after that, I'll be discussing some of my work in short. So, so coming to the first part, deciding a specific research area. Now, if you're in your first or second year right now, as some of the other people explained, the best thing you can do at the moment is to find out what your interests are. And by interests, I mean just broad interests, but this is still not as easy as it sounds, because when I say find your interests, what I mean is not just finding something where you say, yeah, this sounds interesting, but actually reaching a point where you know for a fact that you like or dislike something. So you need to have first-hand experience in things to really know whether you would like working in these things for 6 months in a thesis and well, even further. So I think the steps that I have mentioned over here for exploring, some of them were discussed earlier. As far as robotics and things related to robotics are concerned, there are some really good tech clubs and tech projects on campus. The Electronics and Robotics Club, the Aerodynamics Club, Society of Artificial Intelligence and Deep Learning, TED Celestia, and Kratos. These are some of some pretty good tech clubs and tech projects which are going on campus. And I would encourage all first and second year students to either try to be a part of these projects, or if not being a part of the projects, at least following those projects to get some idea about what is going on in these projects, and that might trigger some interest, as Mohit suggested earlier. The second thing is trying out different CT courses, different MOOCs to get some knowledge and a little hands-on experience in different fields. You can also work on independent projects, which would include hackathons, or you can try open source contributions. Even good SOPs would count. You can follow tech or research channels on YouTube, their Twitter handles. You can follow major conferences. And something which is really underrated, talking to seniors is something which can really help you find your interest. It is something which worked for, I think, most of the people who talk today. So if you're in your first or second year, I would suggest you to keep exploring and not try to narrow down on any specific topic. Coming to the more important part, those of you who are going to apply soon. So from what I've seen, what happens to people after their second year is that at the end of second year, a lot of people have this panic moment where they either feel that they haven't done anything in their first and second year, and they've kind of wasted their first 2 years, and now they don't have anything on the basis of which they can apply. Or the other kind of panic moment that occurs in people is that they feel that they have done a lot of work in first and second year, but it wasn't focused on any particular subdomain or anything in particular. So it feels like their work was just haphazard, and then you start feeling like you don't really have anything to apply over. So thing is, this is something which happens to everyone, including all of us. And the way you can narrow down to specific topics where you can apply at this moment is, firstly, the first thing that you need to do is just list out your broad interest, which could be the things which you found out if you did this in your first or second year, or even if you did not, you may have some idea about some vague interests that you definitely have. And then what I encourage you to do is just try out different random combinations of those interests, and most likely every single combination will correspond to a very specific research topic. In fact, it might in most cases you will also find a very specific research topic in robotics by combining any random interests. So I've just given 2 random examples over here. Suppose you're interested in graph theory, which is purely a mathematics thing, and control systems, which is an electronic subject. You have a combination of those, which is trajectory planning in robotics. In my case, it was I was interested in computer vision, and I was interested in navigation. And a very good combination of that in robotics is a subfield called localization. And once you have these combinations, these specific research topics, this is the point at which you can start finding research groups and research labs. Now, the way to find those would be, firstly, you can look up major conferences in which papers from these fields have been published, and you can see which are the major professors that have published these papers. You can check out their labs, or you can directly search these topics on Google Scholar and find recent publications and well-cited publications on those topics. That would again lead you to some really good research groups and labs which suit you. Or you can go through the websites of different universities and try to find out which professors are working in those specific fields. And fourthly, you can simply just directly Google the particular terms that you came up with and just see who's working on those things right now and who might be a potential professor or a potential lab. Now, once I had the list, the approach that I followed for applying for thesis is kind of the other extreme of cold mailing. So what I did was I tried to write emails that are extremely personalized towards professors, way more personalized than what people mean when they say personalized emails. So I was actually, I used to spend around a week per professor that I have listed down, and I used to try to find out everything that I can about the lab, the work that they do over there, what the professor is looking for. And only when I had all of that information did I actually write an email. So the first and the most obvious thing to do would be to visit the website of the lab or research group and check what kind of research they are interested in. This would give you some general idea about what the goals of that lab are. The next thing that you need to do, if you want to follow this personalized mailing approach, the next thing that you need to do is you need to read the most recent papers, because these are the papers which will tell you what the lab is working on right now. Because if you simply know the research interests of the lab, sure, they might be interested in working in that, but they might not be working in that right now. And the recent papers or the recent preprints, those will be the ones which will give you a very good background on what you need to do if you need to work with a particular lab. And the next thing is that these same papers, they'll usually have a conclusion section where they talk about future work. Now, if you've come across a preprint which was published a month ago, then whatever they've mentioned in the future work section of that paper is what the lab is definitely working on right now. So that's how you know what to ask the professor while mailing. The second thing that I did was I contacted the grad students working in the labs that I had sorted down. Now, connecting with grad students and talking with them is something which will help you figure out what does the lab actually need students for right now. Because maybe you know what they're interested in, maybe you know what they're working on right now, but it is possible that the lab already has enough people working in that, and they're not really looking for someone in that particular area, but there is something for which you may not find information online, but they're looking for students in those subdomains. So talking to grad students is something which helped me a lot. You can also find out how they work and what works for interns actually do in a particular lab, because it may happen that you get a thesis and the project is really interesting, but your job in that project, that the sub part of the project that you are handling might actually end up to be really boring. So talking to grad students will help you figure out what do interns do when they come to the lab, and finally finding out where would you fit if you're taken as a thesis student in the lab. So this is something which further helped me frame my email so that I can actually put these things in my email. I can actually say that I know what you're working on. I've already studied these things which I think would be required to work with you. I've already talked to your grad students, so they already know what I'm looking for, and then that would really give you an edge over the other applicants. And finally, something which is really underrated is using your connections. Now, I think Rajaswa emphasized on this in his talk a couple of days back. I want to emphasize on this particular thing once again. Your connections might really turn out to be your best asset for getting a thesis. And as the other speakers mentioned before, Tech Club seniors are some of the most important connections that you can use for getting a thesis. Now, in fact, that's how I got my thesis. As Harshal or Pranay may have mentioned earlier, one of my club seniors called Nikhil Khedekar was working in the autonomous robot lab as a PhD student, and he had worked with me before since both of us were a part of the electronics and robotics lab. And another senior named Mihir Dharmadhikari, who was one batch senior to me, he was working in the same lab as a thesis student. So I actually contacted those guys to find out all this information about the lab, about what the lab is working on, and what do they need people for. And these seniors ended up recommending me to the lab, and that is what actually got me my thesis. So Tech Club seniors proved to be very important connections. Then there are different communities on there are different communities like Bitsians for each other, Bits R&D, Bits to MS PhD. So now I won't want you to actually spam on these groups or anything, but if you're really serious about going to a particular lab or working with a particular prof, then you will almost always find a Bitsian on these groups who has worked in that lab before. So if you're a part of these groups, you may have seen these messages frequently about people asking for people who have worked in different labs or with a particular professor. And thirdly, your own social circles. circles. Now, this could include literally anyone. It could be your neighbor's uncle. It could be some friend from your school. It could literally be anyone. But your social circles will actually help you, because if you have friends who are actually studying in a university abroad, you can actually call them up and ask them about different professors. You can, because they will have a more they might have a first-hand experience with that professor. They might know what the professor is actually doing right now. They might have some inside information about what the lab is doing right now, and what might actually get you hired as a thesis student. And well, once you frame your email based on the just a minute. Yeah, I'm still here, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so these are some pointers which my seniors had given me before I was applying, and I think you should hear them too, because they were really some of them were really eye openers. So the first one which one of my seniors told me is that the professor that we were talking about, he gets dozens of emails or internships and thesis every week, and he said that all profiles are just as good as yours, and he will select a person only if he somehow gets a guarantee that the student will work till the end. But no one really has the time to go through so many CVs and figure that out. So you see what the problem is over here, right? So what you need to think about from this is that how will you give the professor a guarantee that you will work? And this is not something which you can just mention in an email, because everyone writes this sentence in the email saying that if you take me, I'll really work hard, I'll strive to give my best or whatever. So everyone puts that sentence. That sentence isn't really an indication that you will really do it. So examples would be, for example, in case of Mohit, he had already worked with the professor for a summer internship. So the professor already knew that this is a student who really works well. This is a student who already understands how things work in my lab, and that's why the professor was sure that if he takes Mohit as a thesis student, he will give good results. In my case, I had never worked with the professor before. I had never even talked to the professor before, but my seniors had, and my seniors had also worked with me. So when my seniors vouch for me, and when my seniors say that this guy Rishikesh, I have worked with him, I know that he works well, and I can give a guarantee that if he gets hired in this lab, he will work well. Well, when they say that to the professor, then that is a way for the professor to actually get a guarantee that I will work. Now, in this case, it won't matter if there is some other applicant who might have worked even better than me, because what the professor is looking for is this guarantee. So that is something which I think you should keep in mind, and try to figure out how you will make sure that you can really convey this to the professor. The second really important advice that I heard was, this was from actually from a professor from IISc Bangalore, which I had just called up to, who my dad knew, so I had just called him up to ask for advice on what do professors look for. So I wasn't applying to him, but I was just taking his advice. So what he said was, you will always be an added work for the professor. As an undergrad, you will almost never have enough knowledge or experience to start contributing to the lab's research directly. So your email should show that you already know what they want, and that you will reduce their workload and not increase it. So this is something which you really need to keep in mind while you write your email. And lastly, this is something which I heard from a senior again. That is, a professor would rather work with a newbie who is interested and willing to learn than someone who has a lot of experience but cannot prove their dedication. So this is actually a good news for people who think that they do not have a lot of experience. But well, this applies to everyone, with or without experience. You need to remember that the professor is looking for people who are interested, people who are dedicated, and people who will really give efforts. And compared to that, your experience does not matter that much. And well, moving on to what my thesis was at ARL. So I was working on a subfield of autonomous robotics called perception. I think Pranay may have talked a bit about perception earlier, so I'll just explain what perception is in short. So perception is the subfield of autonomous robotics, which talks about how does a robot perceive its surroundings, what can a robot understand from it, and what conclusions can the robot draw about itself from this understanding of its surroundings. So, well, localization is a part of perception which deals with the robot figuring out its position and its orientation by maybe looking around and using computer vision. So, my thesis was more related to computer vision for robot localization, and I'll just explain in 1 or 2 sentences how computer vision is usually used for robot localization, and then I'll move on to what challenges I had to solve in computer vision for underwater robot localization. So when a robot has to localize itself or figure out its own position, what it does is it usually uses a camera to detect certain unique key points in an image, which are called features. So features are points in an image which are in a way unique. If you look at them from say a different perspective, you'll still be able to identify that this is the same point that I had seen earlier. So the way robots localize themselves using vision is that they detect a lot of features in an image like this, and what they do is they track these features as the robot moves, and they use the relative motion of these features to figure out how much the robot has moved. Okay, so this is what robot localization is using computer vision. Now, SLAM, for those who aren't aware, is simultaneous localization and mapping, which is, as the name suggests, a robot is continuously exploring and building a map of an unknown environment. But at the same time, in order to build a map, the robot needs to know where it is. So it needs to know its location. But in order to know its location, it needs to have the map. So it's kind of a cycle where you need to do localization, but for that you need mapping, and you need to do mapping, and for that you need localization. So performing both of these simultaneously is called SLAM. So coming to my problem statement, you see, so this is just the RGB image version of the image from earlier. This is an image taken from an aerial vehicle, from a famous aerial vehicle localization dataset. So you see that this image contains a lot of information. There are a lot of places where you can detect features and track them. So localization isn't that big of an issue for environments like these. But then this is what an environment looks like underwater. Now you can see that there is very little information in this image that can actually, contain features that we can actually track, let alone mapping them. So my problem statement was how to make feature-based SLAM work for underwater images. So in order to eliminate the challenges in SLAM underwater, the first thing that we did was we figured out what are the degradations that are happening to an image underwater. Why is the image looking like this and not like this when you're underwater? And some of the key reasons are, firstly, light attenuation with distance, which means that when light travels in water, it gets absorbed or reflected around. That's why the light that reaches you is just a small percentage of the light that is actually coming. So you have reduced visibility. You have scattering and reflection, which leads to blurring and loss of texture, which in turn leads to very few features which you can track. There is turbidity, which leads to a similar effect. And then there are these floating particles in water, which ironically are really clear. And that's why a localization or SLAM system usually detects these particles as features and wrongfully tracks them, giving a wrong change in location. Now in aerial or terrestrial robotics, you usually solve these problems by using more sensors like LiDARs and GPS. But the problem is none of these work underwater. For the same reasons, the rays that these devices use, they just don't travel underwater. So the approach that I used was, firstly, if I model all of these degradations as mathematical functions on an ideal image, which means basically the image that I'm receiving from my camera is some function of the image that I should be receiving without degradations. If I find out this function, if I model it, then I can approximate the inverse of this function, and loosely speaking, the inverse of the actual image received should technically eliminate the degradations which are occurring. And finally, once you have the image, the inverse image which has the degradations removed, all you need to do is recondition the feature tracking system so that it suits this new image type. So what you need to do is the bottleneck is finding out this function and finding out the inverse of that function. And for that, what I did was basically you have a degraded image, and this function is obviously not a simple function, and it is different for different parts of even one image. So what you need to do is you need to estimate the function parameters for each part of the image separately based on things like the distance of what that part of the image contains, then disparity in stereo images. Those of you who are aware about stereo vision might know what this is. The amount of structural information that you can see in the image, an estimate of what percent of light is reaching a particular part of the image, and even the properties of the water itself. And once you do that, once you model the function and its inverse and you apply that on images, you can get underwater images which are relatively enhanced. So these are some of the results of the method that I designed in my thesis. Now you can see that all this haze, all this water, light, and reduced textures, most of these things have been eliminated in the images that you see below. Right. Now, as you can see, these images below would be much better for feature tracking. So the next part was seeing how this affects feature tracking and localization. So these are some metrics which showed a significant improvement. Firstly, the number of features tracked in areas of the image which have low transmission, which means the areas of the image from which very little light was actually reaching the camera. The feature tracking in those areas increased by 66%. Then orb is just a method of feature tracking. So when you match a particular feature in a frame with a feature from a previous frame, it gives out a score, and the score basically tells you how sure the system is that it has found the correct feature match. So the scores in feature matching also showed a significant improvement, and the overall lifespan of features, which means how long for how many frames are you actually able to track a particular feature. That is also something which showed an improvement. And finally, these are the results which it showed on a robot trajectory in an underwater cave. So the right hand side image shows the trajectory after image enhancement. So what the robot is doing is basically it is traveling in an entire loop, and then it is traveling in a smaller loop and coming back to its original location. So you can see that without enhancement, this trajectory looks really haphazard, and there are a lot of irregularities. There's a lot of drift, which means that when the robot starts traveling, this is the predicted trajectory. So when the robot starts traveling and comes back to its original position, the localization system actually shows the robot to be much further away from where it is supposed to be. So you can see that this drift is significantly reduced in the trajectory over here. There is better loop closure, which means the robot knows when it has gone back to a place that it has already visited earlier. So you can see a lot of improvements which are caused in underwater localization after employing this method. And yeah, finally, I actually added this. This was a last-minute addition to my slides just an hour back. I think this is something which some of you might be wondering how the pandemic can affect your thesis. So I'll just explain that in short before handing it over to Akash. So firstly, as it happened with Mohit and Rane, remote work may not be possible from either your side or your professor's side. So worst case scenario, like it happened to a lot of people in my batch, your thesis may entirely get cancelled. So while applying itself, it is best if you guys actually think about whether there is an option of this work being carried out remotely. Maybe try to actually ask the professor this. The second thing is that even if you do work remotely, you will have a lot of difficulty conducting the experiments because a lab has really good facilities and you have limited facilities, which even hardware, even computation, everything. The third thing is that your thesis topic may change drastically. You may apply for one topic, but then due to all the uncertainty that is still there, yeah, you may actually end up working in a really different topic. So even in my case, Harshal explained that about the DARPA Subterranean Challenge. I was also originally supposed to work on perception in the DARPA Subti Challenge, but I ended up working on underwater robotics. So it wasn't such a drastic change because I was still interested in this work, but it is something that may happen. Then scrubbed stipends is something you'll most likely not be paid if the work is remote. Some of the biggest problems which me and some of my friends faced was that you end up working alone instead of working with a group of people. That is why, and that's why solving doubts becomes something which is really cumbersome because most of the times the labs are in US and you're in India. So those guys live in a completely different time zone. And if you're working alongside someone physically, then you can just turn around and ask them even random simple doubts. But if someone's in a different country, you don't really end up calling them up or texting them with minor difficulties. So things that may have been solved in 5 minutes may actually take you hours to solve on your own. So that is one thing which me and a lot of other people faced. Then another thing about working remotely, especially in fields like robotics, is that the communication of you and your mentors and supervisors reduces by a great extent. And someone who you might have worked with, with whom you could have worked with for an entire day sitting in the lab, you end up talking to them maybe once or twice a week. And what happens because of this is that it is really hard to communicate. It is really hard for the professor to communicate what is really expected of you. It is really hard for you to tell the professor what you're thinking and which direction you're thinking of doing your research in. And a lot of time what happens is that you end up doing something which is tangent to what the professor expected, and you end up doing a lot of rework. So this communication issue is something which arises for almost everyone who is working remotely. And yeah, it's not like it's your fault or the professor's fault in this or your mentor's fault. It's just that because of the overall pandemic situation, this is a problem which a lot of people face. And finally, there is a lot of uncertainty in the lab's immediate goals. So some of you may have faced this while applying right now, that even the lab head does not know whether they would be able to take interns next semester, or whether they may not know what they might be focusing on in the coming semester. So that is why, as Mohit said, it is really important to have backups. And yeah, I think that's it from my side. If you have any doubts, I think we can answer those in the doubt solving part of this session. And yeah, I guess I can hand it over to Akash now.
Yeah, thanks, Rishikesh. Our next speaker is Akash Chaudhary.
Hello everyone, my name is Akash. I did my research internship at NUS Singapore. I'm still working with them. I will be working with them for the next 1 month. And also, I have started as a researcher in Czech Technical University Multi-Robot System, Prague. So I'm sure by this point it has been an hour and a half. You might be hungry and bored. So I do not have a presentation. Instead, I will just tell you a story. Okay. So this starts in my first semester, and actually, uh, since the start, I was never interested in the academic part of college, and I just wanted to do things like right. So I don't want to read a lot of things. I want to do it. So in the first semester, I literally did nothing, quite contrary to my belief. So in my second semester, a lot of my friends started like wanted to join Baha, and I was like, okay, let's do this. So I went with them to the induction. I got selected, and yeah, so I spent the next 1 year with the Baha team, and the things that I learned there uh, actually paved the way for where I am today, and the technical skills, especially 3D designing, is till date one of my strongest suits. So uh, the thing was, since my first semester, the seniors around me were involved in research, mostly physics. So because I was in Celestia, so and most of them are right now doing their PhD in physics. For someone asking Baha we make an all-terrain vehicle to compete in a competition in Indore. Okay, it is a two-level competition. One is Indian, one is international. The international one is done in California, for which we have never tried because a lot of money goes into it. Okay, so I wanted to do my so from the first semester itself, I wanted to go for a PhD, and at that time, actually, it was physics. I was working with Baha, and I was thinking that I will do my PhD in physics. But by the end of, I think, my third semester, my 2-1, I realized that I do not enjoy theoretical work. I literally do not. And the final nail in the coffin was I went to one of my professors and I asked him, what do you think about PhD? Should I do a PhD or not? And his sentence was, so I asked him what after a PhD, and his sentence was, so after doing your PhD, you become unemployed. And that sentence, I think usually he is very blunt, okay, but he's one of the most honest professors out there, so I knew he would give it to me straight. But by the time my interest in physics was already waning, and that sentence just turned me like literally 180-degree around. uh, and I don't know why I just suddenly thought that I will make a Mars rover. It was such a random thought. I literally had no previous planning or doing it. I was just like one day sitting in my room and I said I will make a Mars rover. I, s- I assembled a team, and that is how we found Project Kratos, which is currently the BITS Goan team for University Rover Challenge. And that is the point where my experience in robotics started to build up. I I did some smaller projects on the side and did some other things, but that was the major thing. So as someone said in the previous in one of their presentations, that they were grilled based upon their CV. So this Kratos and those smaller robotics projects were the point that made me get my thesis. So the part of your thesis, or whether you will get your thesis, is based upon luck, to be honest. So when you mail a professor, a lot of things need to align. The professor should be in need of an undergraduate student. They should be looking for a student in the exact field that you are applying for. So let's say you were applying for the robotics part, but the professor is looking for the acoustic communication part. You will not get it, even though you are qualified enough. So, so that is why my seniors also, and this is what I am suggesting to you. Apply to a lot of professors. Like I have seen people apply to 50, 80 professors and then get a reply. It is literally not based upon your skill level. It's not like if I get a reply on my first mail, I'm more skilled. It is totally based upon luck. So apply a lot. Okay. your CV is the only way your professor can assess you. Okay, so make sure you give enough efforts to make that CV. And the biggest thing is you should be passionate about your field. Nobody cares about your skill level, to be honest, while you are applying for your thesis. Nobody does. When I joined my thesis, they assumed I knew nothing. Okay, even in the parts where I did, they were like, they usually ask me, do you know this? If I said yes, they always said take 1 week. If I said no, they were like, okay, take 2 weeks or whatever time you want. They want, and I think everyone reacted this point. They want someone who is truly passionate towards it. So read papers, get to know what field you're interested in. Thesis is usually to experiment. So I never thought I would work in underwater robotics. So when I started to search for professors, I read a lot of papers and I zeroed into two fields. One was bio-inspired robotics, the second one was underwater robotics. So I applied to I think 8 or 10 labs and I got into two. One was bio-inspired and one was underwater. So I went with this one. So we basically I experimented with it with underwater robotics. I liked it, uh, uh, but yet again, that is transferable skill. The skills that I learned in underwater robotics are easily transferable to aerial robotics and so on. One thing that I want to say is I have felt that a lot of people in our kind of field suffer from imposter syndrome. They always feel that they are not enough and that they don't apply to a certain position, thinking that oh, they would be better people for this position. I will never get it. Uh, don't think like that because yes, there will always be someone better than you. Always. Okay, so never live in an illusion that you are the best. There will always be someone better than you, but that should not stop you from following what you want to do. Okay, do and I am the prime example of it. At the time that I was applying for my thesis, my CGPA was 5.46. Okay, someone asked what is the minimum requirement. My CGPA was 5.46. Even today my CGPA hasn't crossed 6. Okay, and I will be starting my PhD in Prague. So it depends upon how much you give your effort. So I was like, I will not do my studies. I don't want to work towards that. But but at the same time, I spent literally 18 to 20 hours in sandbox per day. I didn't sleep for 3 days straight working on the rover or one thing or the another. So my way was totally unbalanced. Don't do it like me. Do it like the other five have done. Okay, balance both the things. But even if you do decide to go in my direction, which I am again saying, don't do it. Okay, okay. Don't do like this. Okay, because we might be niche examples of this. Have a good balance with it. But even if you go in this direction, make sure that you give your everything to it. So when my professor, the thesis professor interviewed me, every single question was based upon my projects and especially Kratos. So because I had worked a lot in those projects, I was able to answer everything. And because I read upon his research, it 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 worked well. So he didn't care about my CGPA. And the professor under whom I'm going to start my PhD, after he accepted me, I wrote him a mail that sir, you didn't ask for my CGPA. I just want to clear it out that my CGPA is this much so that doesn't cause problems in the future. I was like, I thought that he would now refuse. I had a backup option actually, but I thought he would refuse, like, oh no, we won't accept you CGPA. And his reply was, I do not care about your CGPA. I only care about your hard work and what you bring to the team. And I feel really fortunate that I got such a kind of professor in both my thesis and for my PhD. Which brings me the point: do not go after the university name when doing the thesis. Go after the professor. If the professor is reputed enough, active enough, they will get things done for you. One of the PhD offers that I got was simply because the person I applied under knew my thesis professor. So he called him, asked him about me. My professor recommended me then, like over the call to him, and then he replied that I had a chat with your professor and he really liked you. So I'm offering you. I didn't accept the offer, but you get the point. So so follow your dreams. Do not restrict yourself. Do not think that someone better will apply for it or something like that. Do what you want to do, and you will definitely 100% succeed. And if anybody tells you, right, that like you cannot do it, or no, like this is too much, just think about it. I have a CGPA of 5.5, and I got a PhD offer from a world ranked 11th university. Okay, this is I hope this is not coming like negatively, but again, your hard work matters, not your metrics. Okay, so go for whatever you want. I think that is all from my sorry. Okay, I will tell you about my work too. I forgot about that part. So my work was building a simulator. Okay, for an underwater simulator in Unity 3D connected with ROS. So as Mohit was talking about, his work involved hardware in the loop simulations. My work was completely in simulation. So instead of a long presentation, because I think everyone would like to get their questions answered, I would just show you the simulator, just a bit of this. So this is the start screen where I can enter my IP address of the ROS system, वगैरह वगैरह. Let's can you see my screen? Hello.
Yeah, we can see.
बता दो करो यार.
हाँ बोलो ना.
So this is actually this contains an underwater. I will show you. It contains an underwater vehicle which has a sonar fitted and all the forces that come into play once you underwater, buoyancy, drag, and all the things. So here I can select the model for the sonar, the mission time, the IP address. So I'm running a virtual machine in which I'm running WebSocket. So I'll just enter the IP address. This connects my simulator to my ROS machine. So it is now connected, subscribe to key, and now I can just press R for my simulator inside. Okay, so this is the underwater environment. Let me just show you it from the outside. Seems okay. So my pro version expired, so I do not have access to dark version now. It looks hideous. So this is how the simulator works. It is compatible with ROS 1 as well as ROS 2. I can test every single algorithm that I can. So my current work is to make a digital twin, which is basically I will send my ROV in autonomous mode. It will map the whole area. It will save that map, come back to the control station, and then the control station will take that map, recreate it in its system. Right now, when I send another ROV, I will send it in manual mode. The thing about underwater communication is it cannot be done over radio waves. It can, if you're doing wirelessly, it can only be done over acoustic links, basically sound wave communication. And sound wave communication is high latency, low bandwidth. So it is very hard to send video feed over that. So now, because I already have the map generated, all I need to send from my ROV to my station is the coordinate of my ROV. And by feeding that coordinate into the map, I will know exactly where my ROV is in that environment. And therefore, I will not need a live video feed from the ROV because I can actually see the ROV in the environment in the map created. This is what digital twin is. So I have built the simulator, and now I am moving towards the exploration part. So basically the mapping part, and which is called exploration planning, in which our goal is not to reach a point, but to explore a region. So that is where I am now. I'm developing, not developing, basically testing various exploration planners, and then I will build upon it. There is currently a paper submitted to Oceans 2021, which is a conference for underwater, basically anything related to underwater robotics, marine biology, and any other things. So yeah, and we will make this simulator open source once like there are certain bugs that remain, once we finish like basically polish it a bit more. And I guess that's all. My PhD topic is in multi-robot system, in which we will be using multiple drones and water surface vehicles for various applications. I'm yet to discuss what those are. My meeting is actually on Tuesday, so yeah, there's that. That is all from my side. I think we can now move towards the questions.
Yeah, thanks, Akash. Now, if anyone has doubts, put it in chat box. Yeah, so if there are no doubts, we can end the session. Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And reach out to any one of us if you have any doubts.
Yeah, same. Good night.
Good night.
Good night, people.